Welcome back to another edition of the Quantum Yoga Podcast. I'm very excited to have Kasper van der Meulen on the program today. And he's a best-selling author, storyteller, head teacher of the Wim Hof Academy, and human performance expert. Welcome, Kasper, to the program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I wonder if we could just start off with just you giving kind of a basic introduction to yourself and what you've been up to over the past couple of years.
Yeah. So my name is Kasper. I'm from the Netherlands originally, and I am currently kind of touring all over the world, teaching different things, breathwork, meditation, Wim Hof method, mental optimization, biohacking kind of stuff. That's kind of the sphere I work in. And I'm very privileged to go around and meet awesome people and to have my book out there and, have people actually read it and appreciate it, which is great. And so 3 years ago, actually, Facebook reminded me today that it was exactly 3 years ago today where I announced my book. And what I did then, it's weird, it's crazy to me that's 3 years ago, but what I did is I announced that I was going to write a book, and I had the book cover designed and the back blurb written and everything done, except for the actual book. And I had it printed, test printed, and I made this video that said, and I was just like before the interview, I was watching, before you called me, I was watching that video because I had that Facebook reminder where I'm in front of the camera and I go, hey, my name is Kasper, this is my book, this is what it's about, but it's still empty. I'm going to start writing it on January 1st and stop writing it on the last day of January. And I put it up for pre-order. And then a whole bunch of people bought it. And the day I started writing, there were like 250 copies sold. And then I had to write a book in 30 days, which was very interesting challenge. And all the stuff I learned from a book, I learned it in the period before that. I used to be overweight, depressed, burnt out. I had all kinds of shoulder injury, migraines, a heart rhythm disorder, and all these issues. And I set on a path to fix myself. And then the book was kind of the way for me to see, can I go out into the world and share my message and see if I can help other people. And one of the things I did research on and applied myself to get my health in check was the Wim Hof method. And then that took a really cool turn, became a big part of my career to teach the Wim Hof method together with Wim. And my book did really well back home in the Netherlands, still doing well. It's holiday time. Christmas sales are good, so it's still working. And did very well in the US as well. It's been out there for a year. So, it's been a wild ride, a lot of fun, a lot of amazing people that I've met, and I've been able to reach quite a few people with my message. So just gratitude all around. And now I'm here on this podcast, which is also another cool milestone along the way.
Well, so just for listeners who want to kind of dial this in while we're talking, you can go to mindlift.com and check out his book Mindlift, Mental Fitness for the Modern Mind. And, I kind of wanted to ask you about some of the aspects of the book, but now my first thought is, well, geez, I wonder your implementation of this philosophy and its evolution since then as the result of this explosive growth and you kind of managing your attention. It's like next level mastery, right?
Oh man, I wish, I wish it was mastery. The one thing that I always tell people, and it's in the beginning of the first chapter in the book, is titled "Don't Believe Anything I Say." Well, there's an introduction with my story, and then it goes, "Don't believe anything I say." And what's very important to understand for people is that I write and speak about this stuff because I need this stuff. And you're absolutely right. As soon as it all took off and life took off, and it became a massive adventure of travel and going around, I've had to actually go back and reread my own book quite a few times and just go like, hold on, like what was my best method for this again, and just really implement and integrate it in my life at the deepest level, because my life has took a turn for the interesting and spectacular in a lot of ways. For me at least, that's what it feels like, that I've been able to do so much and to travel so much and to have so many awesome business opportunities that, it's been actually a challenge to manage that, to manage my attention, to manage my energy, because I came from a place where my life wasn't where I wanted it to be, my health wasn't where I wanted it to be, and then I basically decided on the exact life I wanted, and I went after it, and I got it. And then, if you can spend every waking minute doing exactly what you want to do, having people appreciate you, having the business side run really well, why would you ever stop? And then you have to. I had to kind of learn the hard way, like, oh, right, you can actually really drain yourself on stuff you're super excited about too, So it's been great. Like, and I feel it's been great, but it's also been challenging. But I feel it's just a very important thing for everybody in my position of like teaching and people following advice to know that nobody who teaches this stuff is perfect in it, and we all do it because we need it, and everybody is just a human that needs to apply it. So yeah, it's been a challenge, but I feel like I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah. Well, good. So your book is sort of laid out, this for the listener here. Basically, you talk a little bit about the modern mind. You talk a little bit about neuroscience, the sort of three aspects of the brain. And then you set up this pyramid of the foundation of this pyramid being mindset, the sort of next layer being method, and the top layer, the capstone, being means. And most people have this reverse whenever trying to set out on pursuing a goal or an endeavor. And making that distinction was pretty interesting. Getting into the mindset where it's sort of like the not sexy but really important stuff. Right? I mean, because most people want to talk about the means. Like, what are you doing? What's your awesome meditation hack for conquering your mind, right? They want to talk about the means. Let's talk about the mindset for a little bit. I want to know, through your process over the last 3 years of this growth and all the changes that occurred, what has been, if you can narrow it down, what has been the single mindset of these 10 that you found has repeatedly produced yield for you? Like, you've gone back to and go, oh man, this is really the keystone.
Well, I think it has to be the first one, which is probably why it's the first one, but it's the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. I think it's the most foundational thing to understand. There is one other thing that I would add to it that is not specifically in the book because I didn't know. I knew about it, but and the other one is connection to like-minded humans is the most important, secondary thing. But you can only develop that through a growth mindset. So in short, there's this, and this has been very well, and I can recommend this book to anybody. Very well written by a psychologist called Carol Dweck. The book is called Mindset. And it is about this kind of almost like a binary. It's more like a spectrum, but you could look at it as a binary view of mindset where you have the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. Growth mindset basically says, let's start with the fixed mindset, actually. It's easier to explain that way. The fixed mindset basically says you have been put on this earth with a set of qualities and abilities, and that's what you have to do it with for the rest of your life. You can maybe tweak it a little bit, go up and down a little bit, but these are your fixed qualities. This is who you are. This is your identity. And now you just try to run with that as best as you can. The growth mindset says, yes, you have been born with certain predispositions or maybe genetic tendencies and certain qualities and abilities, but the manner in which they will actually shine and yield any kind of result or give you any tangible things in life is through effort and through developing those. And especially, or even the ones that you are not born with naturally, they need more effort, and you need to put in more time and more energy to make them grow. But you can actually make them grow. So it is very much about you're fixed like this is your identity, and deal with it, versus there's plasticity. You can make something out of everything. And that's still the most foundational thing to have, especially because different parts of life and different parts of your personality can be grounded in different parts of those mindsets. For example, when it comes to athleticism, I've always had a growth mindset. When I was a kid, I was like, I think it was 10 when I started playing basketball because my friends were doing it and they were jocks. I was the fat kid. I was shorter than most people. It was before my growth spurt, luckily. And then, luckily when I started playing basketball, I was also started growing like crazy, which actually ended up destroying my joints. But at that time, it worked really well. But, I was the fat kid in school. I was the least athletic kid in the playground, and my friends could go around and do like the 3 weekly practices with a team and be decent players, and I had to put in hour after hour after hour on the court. But through doing that, within like 6 or 7 months, I was beating everybody, and it taught me about work ethic and about being able to do that. Where another example, when I was a musician a few years back, I had a period where I was a pro or semi-pro musician playing percussion and different instruments. The first time I started playing drums, for example, I could just kind of do it. It came natural to me, and everybody said, hey, you are a musician, you are creative, you are a drummer. And having that label of identity made me not practice as much, made me not even want to practice, because I was like, what practice is for people without talent. I'm talented, And then the issue is that, like my basketball growth mindset would be, if I lost, I train harder, because it didn't say anything about me as a person, but about my work. Now, as a musician, if I would play a gig and it would suck or people wouldn't like it, I would take it personally because it said something about my identity, about who I was. So I had a fear of failure. It took the fun out of it because it was, every fail was a fail of my identity instead of my work. So that's just an overview of how those mindsets work and how it was for me personally.
I love your connection, your observation, really, when you were teaching about watching kids develop, and that this sort of being the core of whether a kid ends up enjoying and sort of being successful in their work and studies in school as a result of parenting. And the reason it was so poignant for me is I just had a newborn, so I'm starting to have this sort of developmental questioning going on here. How best do I help my girl? But that was so fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would see this, and this is obviously anecdotal, but it's been really well scientifically studied as well. But just in my own practice, I would see kids with a very, similar set of qualities from basically the same neighborhood with wealthy parents, highly educated parents. They would have a similar physicality even, just two boys from the same neighborhood, same kind of parents, been friends their whole life. And all these similarities, and they come in with great grades. They start out with great grades, and you just expect them to do similarly the whole time. And then after a while, I would see one of them kind of drop off, not enjoy school as much, develop performance anxiety, and the other one would just flourish and have fun. And I would see, and I've seen like one of them that is super, almost like the perfect experiment in a sense, where it was so similar, but I've seen a lot of, different examples of this along the spectrum, where the kids who would develop performance anxiety, fear of tests, and would lose their joy in the schoolwork that they used to love, their parents would communicate to them, and teachers usually communicate within a fixed mindset, but especially parents, they would say, you're so smart, you're so intelligent, you're such a genius, and the kid would come home with a good grade, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you see, you're a math genius, you're a mathematician, or you're a scientist, or you're the best at language and stuff like that. So all of these things they would hear throughout their life, and they would be praised on, would be things of which they had no idea how they got them. And all identity based. So so this number on the test, if it's a good number, and we have a number system, our grades are 0 to 10, not the ABC system. So just for reference, if the number is high, if it's an 8 or 9 or 10, it means I am a genius. I am a good person. But hold on, what happens if you flip it around and there's a low number? What does that say about your identity? Well, what's the opposite of being a genius? You're dumbass, right? So it's really difficult for these kids to gauge what that number means, and they link it to their identity. Now, on the flip side, the kids that would be raised with the growth mindset, they would get home with any grade, and the parents would ask, how did you get this grade? Whether it was a 10 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10, there would just be a question. Hey, how did you do that? How did you study? And what was your most interesting question? So many. That's such a for a lot of parents, it's such a mind-blowing thing to do that, to have a kid come home with a test, and even though it's and not even have a judgment there. No matter what the outcome of the test is, to have a parent just go, what was your favorite question to ask, right? And how did you come up with the answer? How did you write it down? And, what was your formulation of the answer? And why did you write it down that way? Or how did you study for this? What would you do differently next time? No matter the outcome. So they would always focus on growth. And not from the perspective like, you can always do better, you can always do better. Like, it's fine to tell a kid it did a great job. But there's just very little communication in the thing, great job. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually struggling, not even struggling, but I'm putting in a really big effort to do that in terms of my communication, because my daughter is smart and she's beautiful and she's awesome, right? But she is not helped by me telling her that 10 times a day. I want to tell her that every day, like 1,000 times, but it doesn't help her. There's no information. There's no education. Instead of saying, and especially you're beautiful, that's a really difficult one. One of the kids I would see in school that had some of the biggest issues with anxiety and like self-worth issues would be the most beautiful girl in the class. And everybody, and this is the thing, growing up, you think everybody wants to be the most beautiful girl in the class, but trust me, you don't. Because these kids are being praised and praised and praised. They get privileged for things of which they have no idea how they got them. You were born this way. Right? So there's this big anxiety of, what if I someday fail to be beautiful, or I fail to be, that identity? And there's just no useful information communicated in the phrase, you are this, or you are beautiful, you are creative. So, and now already, even my daughter is 2, and she's my biggest guru I've ever had. I am extremely specific at the compliments I give her. I tell her exactly which kind of behavior she showed that I'm happy with. And also, like, if she shows me a drawing, which she's starting to make a drawing now, the first thing I want to do, oh, that's great. And well, honestly, it's not that great. It's just a bunch of lines on a piece of paper, right? But as parents, you want to say that's great. And then you're training your kid to put some stuff on paper, to hold it up, and to get that little dopamine trigger of, oh, that's great, you're amazing, you're an artist. So what I'm trying to do now is to say, for example, why did you choose that color? Or even if I do say that's great, I say, you must have practiced really hard for that. Or how did you practice for that, right? So it's really such an, like, I used to kind of be a smartass about it when I taught about this, when I taught other people's children about this. And I was like, these people should have a more growth mindset. But, if you've never been a parent and then you suddenly become a parent, then you realize how little you understood about parenting before you became a parent. So it's definitely humbled me, but it is effective. That's for sure. Mm.
Well, I want to jump ahead a little bit in the book. The next section you have is on method, which is mostly about quantification, experimentation, establishing that, and move to means, because that's there's a lot in there I'd like to get into details with. Tell us about meditation, how you use this, what you teach, meditation and mindfulness. I know this is a big piece of, it seemed anyways, like a big piece of your own growth experience.
Yeah, that's for sure. I haven't done tons and tons of formal mindfulness meditation. So the kind of meditation where you sit down and be quiet, it's not my favorite kind, but it's been very powerful, very, very powerful in my life. So I'm not the type of person, a lot of people assume that I meditate an hour every morning and an hour every night. I don't, but I definitely have honed this skill, and this is what it's about for me, the skill of being able to observe yourself in the moment. That's like the foundational skill that has allowed me to do all the other stuff that I wanted to do. So, and what I mean by that, let me repeat that, the simple act of stepping back and observing yourself and how you behave in the moment. So that can be your thoughts, your emotions, your your physical sensations, the state of your heart rate, the state of your breath. To me, and there's a lot of ways to meditate, but for me, the most important skill that I've trained with it is whatever state you're in, however you want to respond to the world, however you want to behave in relation to anything, the ability to just step back and go, what am I doing now? And who is it that is doing it? Which part of me is doing it? Do I agree with this? Where does it come from? Or sometimes you just go, hey, look, there it is, which is much more of a mindfulness setting where you don't try to call anything, you don't try to judge anything, you just watch it. Just watch it happen. And that's even been my mantra in the harder times in my life when I was meditating, and just sit down, and then my mantra would be, just watch it, just observe it, just see what happens. And then you get to learn that there's all this stuff bubbling up inside of you, and there's thoughts happening and emotions and worries and like trying to predict the future or living in the past. And then you get to watch yourself do that while you kind of like take an observing approach, and then study yourself and see yourself respond to things. And then if you do that sitting down in a seated meditation, you can take that skill into life. And then, in terms of lifestyle change, because all of these means that I've wrote down in the book, they're all like changes in life and in lifestyle. And one of the most difficult things for people is to integrate those on the long term. So let's say you want to have that cigarette or that, that donut on which you've agreed you weren't supposed to have it. Then in that moment, you can go, hold on, wait a second. What am I about to do? Which part of me is doing it? Where does this stem from? Do I agree with this? And you can make a little change. So it's like the Viktor Frankl quote that says, in between stimulus and our response to it, there is a space. In that space lies our choice, and in that choice lies our freedom. To me, meditation is about watching that space and slowly enlarging it.
The big thing that I would like to talk about with you is breath work. I see it on your website. I know you probably have had a lot of experience also through the Wim Hof Association there. Tell us about can we talk about breath maybe in terms of sympathetic, parasympathetic?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's the way to go.
Okay, good. Well, lead us into that.
So what I found very interesting, by the way, the reason I haven't done a lot of formal meditation is because I've done a lot of formal breath work. So that's my favorite way of meditating, because I have, my monkey mind is pretty strong, and if I have something to do like running or yoga or meditation, then or breathing, then I can focus on this activity, and it gets me into the meditative state. Also, I found early on that through breathing, you can put your body into a meditative state without having to wait for it while just sitting down. You can create the physiological circumstances under which meditation can happen. So, for people who don't know, the nervous system has a few foundational settings, and it's usually taught in like a binary system where you have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic system. Now, there is also the polyvagal theory, and anybody who's interested in the nervous system and wants to nerd out on it, you should check out the polyvagal theory because it kind of moves away from this binary idea. It's not that the binary idea doesn't work at all. It still works, but there's just more there. But let's stick to the binary one. You have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system is what's known as the flight system. What I like to explain is you have, we're basically still hunter-gatherers, and you have an outside of the cave and an inside of the cave system. And when you're outside of the cave, you're in sympathetic. You need to hunt and gather and collect food, protect your territory. Your senses need to open. You don't need to digest food because you haven't really caught it yet or gathered it yet. You need to be alert and open and active. You need to have sugar in your blood, your liver. Make sure you have that and ready to go. A bit of cortisol, so hormonally you change. And then when you're done doing that, you go back into your cave and you calm down. So parasympathetic system, also known as rest and digest, where your heart rate kind of slows down, your breathing can slow down, your senses don't have to be in that heightened state, and you feel your stomach growl and your mouth water, and you prepare your food and you eat and you rest and you recover, sleep. And there's these two systems. Now, obviously, in the modern world, we don't have, when we go into our cave, we have our iPhones and our TV and our news and all this impulses and the artificial light, all these impulses telling us that we're still outside of the cave, so we don't calm down anymore. So most people in the modern world are sympathetically dominant. They're stuck in the action mode, stuck in the stress mode. And, if there's anybody who does not feel like that's them listening, please let me know. I'd love to learn from you. It's the modern condition. Now, here's the cool thing, and related to breath work, we all know that if you're in a certain state of body and mind, there's a state of breath that comes along with it. So let's say, you're putting out a lot of energy, like during a workout, for example, you're out of breath. Or even more heightened, if you have a panic attack, you have uncontrolled hyperventilation. But if you're laying in bed and you're completely calm and relaxed, or you're having, you're having a massage or whatever, you're just chilling out and having a nice walk outside, your breathing is very slow and it's very calm and it's through your nose. So we know there's a state of mind and body, and it comes with a state of breath. What we haven't been taught is that it's two-way traffic. So if your state of mind and body changes, your breath changes. But if you change your breath, you can change the state of your mind and body. So this is one of the quotes that I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I came up with it. Somebody might have been before me, but the breath is the remote control of your brain and nervous system. And the next statement is, breathe for the state you want, not the one you're caught in. So most people are stuck breathing too fast. They're hyperventilating. So very basically, if you look at, if you hyperventilate, you will have a panic attack. If you breathe slowly and calmly, you will calm down. So sympathetic state breathing is mouth breathing into the chest and focused on breathing in. So if you think about somebody hyperventilating, it's really into the chest, mouth open, focused on inhale. Parasympathetic, so rest and recover breathing, is into the nose, into the diaphragm, so that's your most important breathing muscle, and very slow and relaxed and calm, and even focused on the out-breath. So just by changing your breath, you can modulate yourself along the spectrum, and there is a state of breath for every state of mind and body.
So give us some examples, because tell us how sort of the inner fire breath fits into this system that we're defining. Tell us about something like 478 that you write about in the book, and maybe some other ones that you find as key for helping one regulate different mind-body states.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, just breathing through your nose as much as you can. That's the most important one, because the more you can maintain calm nose breathing, the more your nervous system can stay in a calm state. So even under pressure of stress, if you can still nose breathe, like if you're doing a hard workout, or you're getting ready to go into a meeting and you're stressed about it, if you just breathe through your nose, you're training your ability to maintain in the parasympathetic state throughout whatever life throws at you, which is the thing that you can practice, for example, with adding intensity in strength training. If you're lifting heavy weights and you keep your breath through your nose, you're going to tell your nervous system, it's okay. So breath is input for the nervous system. That's important to understand. That's how we use the ice bath, right? So you go into the ice bath, your breath is taking away from you. You go, your body wants to panic you out of the ice bath and tell you, hey, there's danger, get out of here. And then you calm your breath down and go to your nose and breathe slowly to your nose. And by doing that diaphragmatic nose breathing, you're telling your nervous system, actually, we can deal with it. It's cool. So that's important. So that's kind of like an informal thing. Just keep your mouth shut, breathe through your nose always, as much as you can. And then you have something like the Wim Hof method breathing, which is one of the most powerful tools out there, which is actually, in a nervous system perspective, a kind of strength training, because it's a series of fast breathing, deep breathing, where you're breathing more than you normally would. Some people call it a controlled hyperventilation, but I don't think that's a just term for what's going on, but you could call it that. So you're basically breathing faster and deeper than you normally do, and you're racing your sympathetic system up. Your heart rate is going up. You're producing adrenaline. But you're in a meditative state. So you're watching yourself as you basically breathe yourself into the sympathetic, and then watching how you respond and learning from it. Then you go into a very calm out-breath hold. And people who want to do this, you should check out the website. There's not enough information in this explanation to practice it. You can do the free mini course It's awesome. Anyway, so you do a series of deep breaths where you raise your sympathetic, then you exhale and you relax and you hold that for as long as it's comfortable. And you go into this very, you basically train yourself to de-escalate from that sympathetic state. So, there's a few rounds there, like 3 or 4 rounds, where you are doing almost like strength training for your nervous system, where you go activate, deactivate, upregulate, downregulate, action, 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 calm, calm, calm. And that just makes you more resilient for life in general. Now, and there's like, I could talk for a week about the benefits of that specific breathing, which I often do actually in my retreats. But that's from a nervous system perspective, amazing. And there's all these chemical benefits and immune system. And then there's these beautiful mini practices like box breathing or 4-7-8 breathing, where you're using a very controlled sets and reps, basically, if you want to take an athletic perspective, of breaths to tell your nervous system something. So, for example, box breathing is very popular. You breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out 4 counts, and hold for 4 counts. And it's rhythmical and it's symmetrical. So it seems to be, and there's actually some studies that underline this pretty well, if you have a rhythmic breathing pattern, it will calm your system down, which means that it's cyclic. It means that your inhale is as long as your exhale, and the inhale hold is as long as your exhale hold, like with box breathing, it's symmetrical. That promotes focus and clarity and calm. So it's still rhythmic, so it's still an active breathing, but it's controlled and with a breath hold. So you're telling the body, you're not getting more oxygen than this, but we're still staying in rhythm, so stay awake. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then if you have 4-7-8 breathing, what you're doing is you're breathing in for 4 counts. And remember, inhale is more sympathetic. Then you hold it for 7 counts, where you're telling your nervous system, you know what, you're not getting more oxygen than this, deal with it. And then the body goes, all right, we'll deal with it by lowering the heart rate, which is calming you down. And then you breathe out for 8 counts, so twice as long as the inhale. And as you're doing a controlled exhale, you're stimulating the vagus nerve, which is the most important actor in the parasympathetic system. And it downregulates inflammation and gets you out of active mode, which is like, I use it as kind of like a sleeping pill almost, right? So I do it before sleep. So in this way, there's all these cool little methods that you can use to improve the way your nervous system responds to things. And now, most recently, my field of interest has moved to strength training and strength endurance. I own a gym in my hometown together with my brother, and we implement a lot of breath work there. Nose breathing in cyclic patterns with specific movements aligned. That's a general description. And I've been working with a guy called Julien Pinot. He developed a system called StrongFit that explains very well how the nervous system works and correlates with specific chains of muscle in the body. And his system, combined with a few of the tricks I've learned through breathwork, nose breathing, fits perfectly. And now we're kind of like heading into the athletic world and helping athletes improve their strength endurance and significantly improve their recovery, and just teach them how their nervous system works and also how to control it in moments of hyperintensity in a workout. So, on all fields, there's so much to learn from the breath.
Circling back to that Wim Hof method, I don't remember if I saw this maybe on your Instagram feed or on the Wim Hof Instagram feed about DMT breath. Is this something that you can talk about?
I can. It's difficult to talk about. We don't. It used to be called DMT breathing, that specific breathing technique. Now we call it power breathing because we've come to a consensus about the point that you don't really know whether DMT is actually happening there. It's really difficult to study. For the people who don't know, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is a compound that is natural in almost all organisms, but in a high dose. Like if you would take it externally, if you have a plant that is rich in DMT, like ayahuasca, or you extract DMT and you would smoke it or you would drink it, in the ayahuasca case, you would have a profoundly psychedelic experience, like a very mind-opening, state where your brain goes into this hyperplastic mode, and you get to almost rewire your brain on the spot, and work through emotional processes. And proper use of psychedelic tools like that is now becoming bigger and bigger in the health world. I see a lot of it. It's a very interesting field. But we can trigger similar, extremely similar states through breathing. So we used to call it used to be called DMT breathing because it was so similar. And also there's some it might not even be speculation, some hypothesis that specific breathing technique triggers the pineal gland to release DMT, endogenous DMT, into the brain and have that mind-opening, hyperplastic mode, and then to be able to have a spiritual experience or an emotional release. And we see that through breathing a lot. And not just through the Wim Hof breathing. I mean, there's transformational breathing, rebirthing, holotropic breathing. They do similar things where they put the mind and body in a state that is a psychedelic state without having to take a psychedelic drug. So this is a big part of my retreats. So the things, and actually next month I'm going back to Poland, do like a full week retreat there, and we basically we have a beautiful a dark. Well, it's not beautiful, but it's dark, so you don't notice it's not beautiful. But I mean, it's a great space where everybody lays down, and we guide people through very intense breathing protocols that give them these psychedelic states and altered states of consciousness and deep emotional release and spiritual insight just through doing the breathing. And a lot of times these people say like, hey, you know what, I've done ayahuasca at some point, and this was almost exactly the same experience, but different, but on that level of insight, the same experience. So it's a very interesting field.
Yeah. When I would teach a variation of this in my teacher trainings, I noticed that about maybe 30-40% of people doing this at the end, when we kind of would do a recap and an exploration of what people experienced, about that many people would say they would see a purple or indigo light, like multicolored, but primarily this color light, right in the center of their head.
Yeah, we hear that a lot too.
So, but this is a smaller percentage, right? I mean, and we're talking about a 15-minute, 4-cycle type of breathing pattern rather than a very long, intense, sort of longer, elongated experience. But what do you suspect that is?
I don't speculate on that because it's not my field of I've always made a point of combining the esoteric with the scientific. All my more esoteric spiritual teachers that I know and friends that I talk about, they say, oh, it's the third eye chakra, and it correlates with purple light. And then the third eye, the pineal gland is known as the third eye, where we produce DMT and where we connect to the higher self. So that's not my formal answer. It's just the best answer I've heard for why it's purple, right? Seeing light, I've talked to some people who are, I've talked to some neuroscientists, but also to some people that are just very into that field. And they say, well, the lights you see are a representation of the state of your nervous system, or some people say you're seeing almost like the electricity that is happening in your brain between your neurons, and you're seeing a representation of that when you're in that state. All of those are plausible and very interesting. What I do know is that as the breathing changes or intensifies, and if you lengthen the practice, there will be much, much more of that. A lot of people see the purple light fairly soon. And a lot of people agree on, purple light means third eye means DMT. I'm not so sure about that. There's a lot of kind of things that point in other directions, but I want to agree with that. It fits so well with everything I believe and want to believe, but I'm not sure of it. That's just I'm trying to stay nuanced on that point. I do know that at a certain point, the white can become light, and it's a white dot, and it can enlarge and enlarge and enlarge until you're in a field of just bright white light, even though you're breathing in a dark basement, basically. There's patterns, there's visuals. Some people see the sacred geometry that a lot of people see in other states, or some people have they see things that are similar to a near-death experience that they've had somewhere in the past. So it's just such a tremendously interesting field, and much more questions than answers, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, last question on this point is, if one wanted to explore that more with this, with the power breathing, would you just add more sets?
In a sense, but I would say focus on skill. So the skill of breathing basically means that you get to know your body at a deep, deep, deep level. So, for example, your diaphragm, you can learn to control your diaphragm with the same skill as you can learn to control, your bicep or maybe even your hand. There's so many details. Your diaphragm is connected to all the organs below it. It's the most important muscle you have. And just being able to use it properly will allow access to deeper states of breath. And then there's the pelvic floor muscles, right? The pelvic floor and the diaphragm, they make like a column. If that column is misaligned and you can't access those muscles and you don't have the skill of those muscles, so you can have a lot of people have structural issues around their diaphragm and pelvic floor because they sit down their whole life or they've had an injury, and then they don't have that muscular control. So sometimes some people even need to kind of have chiropractic or like osteopath help them to get that alignment, or a movement practice to get that alignment. Yoga is an important one to get alignment. So that's the thing, learning the skill of engaging those proper breathing muscles. And then there's a whole bunch of muscles that are like accessory muscles to breathing that are around your ribs and even around your neck that are involved. You can learn to control those. Then the skill of controlling your breath is the skill of regulating your vagus nerve. So understanding how every single breath influences your nervous system at a detailed level is another part of the skill. Using your breath in more intense athletic settings will add to it. So what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, you can, like if you do holotropic breathing, basically you go lay in a fetal position and hyperventilate until you blow your mind. Now, there's probably some holotropic breathers that are going to be offended by that statement, but if I'd have to reduce it to a one-sentence thing, that's what they do. Now, and this is something you don't want to do without proper guidance. I mean, it's insanely mind-blowing and beautiful, but people can get to that state without all of practice. But if you want to, let's say, consciously and in a reliable way reach those states in a shorter amount of time, then you will have to kind of like get into the nitty-gritty of exactly how does every breath work and how can I use every single breath to modulate my state. So what used to take me an hour of really deep breathing practice, the states I would get into, I can now get there in 10 or 15 minutes. And the difference is practice, practice, practice. Growth mindset.
Yeah. Quality over quantity.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the cold, which is another sort of foundational piece of your own personal growth experience, Wim Hof, and you do mention it in the book as well. Tell us about science. Talk to us about science. Oh, talk to us, Kasper. What? Tell us about why the cold is so important.
Oh, well, man, there's so much to say there. I'm actually looking out of my window into a snowstorm. We're fortunate to have my country blanketed in snow for these days. So the first thing I did this morning was put my feet out into that cold, fresh snow and just completely marveled in the excellence of that. So science, yes. Evolution. So let's start from an evolutionary biology perspective. Humans are evolved to be in contact with their environment. Just like we need to modulate gravity to tell our body it needs to be strong, we need to modulate temperature to tell our nervous system and immune system to be active and to be ready. And our metabolism, our mitochondria are constantly, and so at the cellular level, you're always responding to your environment. In the modern world, it's like we've been tricked into believing we're individuals and we're supposed to have our own individual lives and to be, completely devoid of any, response or fluctuation in relation to our environment, which is obviously nonsense, right? So our environment dictates our state in a lot of time. We need the right spectrums of light, right parts of the spectrum of light in our day to feel good. We need to feel temperature to feel healthy. So if you're always in a temperature controlled, warm, comfortable room, and you're always at that constant state, your body doesn't need to be flexible. It doesn't need to be able to adapt. Your nervous system will not get the input to keep the immune system fresh and healthy. There's just nothing interesting going on. And as soon as you start to add new input, you'll find that your whole body starts to flourish on it. It's great for it. But obviously, it's a hormetic stressor. That means, so the term hormesis means that a little bit of a bad thing can be a very good thing. So, for example, strength training, you're inputting some intensity, some load, some force, even a little bit of damage into the system, and then the system goes, hold on, okay, we got it, we need to be stronger. And so the cold, just like a sauna, is a hormetic stressor. You're inputting intensity, you're telling the body, you know what, something's up, and you want to be strong and resilient, and it makes you less fragile to do so. And people in the modern world are insanely fragile. They get sick at every turn. They get tired of everything. They can't handle stress. And one of the big factors in there is that we're detached from our direct environment, and our body does not get the sufficient input to tell it, hey, guess what? Time to be strong, resilient, energetic. So as soon as you encounter the cold, you touch the cold, your circulation changes. So you all know if you sit in a sauna, you become bright red, and it's because your blood, your all those capillaries, they open up because the warm blood goes to the extremities to basically give away heat. It's trying to give away the heat to the surrounding environment. So all those little veins, they open up. It's called vasodilation. Then when you encounter the cold, all those veins have to do the opposite and protect the body from losing heat and basically push all of that, well, not all of it, but push most of the warm blood into the core and allow it to circulate in the core where the vital organs are to protect the vital organs. And, you'll get some white fingers or less red fingers, I should say, and it'll feel cold. And that's just a massive workout for a circulatory system to be able to switch between basically vasodilating, so opening those bloodways, and vasoconstricting, closing them down. Well, not closing them down, but restricting the blood flow there. That's strength training for your entire circulatory system. And as we all know, if your circulatory system fails, you're dead. Heart and circulatory related diseases are like the number one killer just about anywhere. And you get to actually train that under a cold shower or by going into, like, putting your feet out into the snow. You're training all those thousands of miles of little capillaries that are carrying your blood. Is that enough science for you, by the way? Because I can go on for hours. But
yeah, well, let's talk about, let's move towards, so I love this. You're training the smooth muscle. That makes a whole lot of sense. You're regulating the mitochondria. How does this play with the hormonal system? And specifically, people who are, let's say, hypothyroid, do they have a challenge with this?
Initially, absolutely, yeah. And I'm not an expert on the mechanics of the thyroid. I'm much more of I'm a science teacher, so I have a very global view of all the scientific stuff, which I enjoy. But my experience is that I meet a lot of people with thyroid issues. It's a very common thing. It's growing rapidly. There's something going on there. People are hormonally deregulated basically the whole time in the modern world. And it seems that for a portion of those people, the cold and the breath work can play a role in almost like resetting the hormonal system to start working better. And reset is kind of like a dangerous word to use because it sounds so big, and it's not that simple. The hormonal system is endlessly more complicated than most people even can grasp, including me. But my speculation hypothesis is that the cold and the breathing trigger these stress hormones. They trigger, for example, adrenaline, and whenever that happens, the body goes into this fight-flight state, and a lot of other hormonal systems tend to work differently in that time. And then when you're back, there's almost like a reset where it goes, okay, what's needed right now, and it start it up again. And there's this flexibility in the nervous system and in the hormonal system that is trained by it. Those are my best insights on it. I know it sounds kind of vague, but it's always difficult to say something about specific issues. Some things are like circulatory issues or even inflammatory issues. We can pretty accurately say exactly what's going on in relation to the cold, but thyroid is not really my field of expertise. I know an equal amount of people to which the Wim Hof breathing in the cold has been tremendously helpful, as the other 50% saying it didn't work, or and then a tiny percentage said it made it worse.
And so talk to us a little bit more about inflammation and how this affects that process.
Yeah, so general inflammation, what most people walk around with, is we call it, in scientific terms, it's they call it the second line of defense. So it's a general reaction to some intruder. And it's the same reaction every time. So for reference, the first line of defense is like your skin and your saliva and the hairs in your nose. It's just keeping stuff out. Third line of defense is the specific immune system. So if you had one flu, the body figures out how to attack that flu. It's stored in the database, and as soon as that flu comes in, the immune system just deals with it. And a second line of defense is like, if you have a cut and it turns a bit red, that's general inflammation. Sometimes you feel it in swelling, and what basically happens is, there's an intruder, and it's not really clear what it is. Right, so let's say you're in an airport and there's an alert. There might be there might be a terrorist, and then the whole airport goes into high alert. Everybody's searched. There's more guards walking around and checking everybody, and there's white blood cells for the immune system, and everybody's kind of bothered by it, but it's just to be sure. And that's kind of like what the second line of defense, general inflammation, looks like. Now, in the human body, this can be triggered by all kinds of stressors, like by mental stress, physical stress, eating the wrong things, having your gut biome out of balance, having a cut or a bruise, by doing a heavy workout, not having enough sleep. There's all these things that are stressors, potential dangers to the system, and the system responds by just heightening the security in the system at that time, and that's general inflammation. Now, sounds like a good thing, which it is, because it detects the stuff that's not supposed to be there. But if you live a life where you have these constant stressors and the body almost gets stuck in this chronic inflammation, there's I read this statistic. I've read different statistics, but there's like I have to say like 80 or 90%, a number like that. Don't pin me down on the number, but a number like that of all diseases that we know can be related back to chronic inflammation. And so over the years of having that life of those stressors, you build up this chronic base of inflammation that your body is constantly in, and then that can manifest itself to people who are more sensitive to insulin-related issues. It could actually turn into diabetes 2 type of thing, or just messes up their insulin sensitivity. For some people, in some people, the nervous system, the immune system gets out of control and start attacking itself, and then it can turn into all kinds of autoimmune diseases. So that's one of the things, the big challenges for the modern world is to downregulate inflammation in relation to these stressors. Now, in comes the breathing and the cold. With all the stuff I've explained before, it starts to be apparent that simply by going into the cold, we can trigger a bit of adrenaline, trigger a bit of fight, flight, and make the body go, you know what, survive this cold first and deal about the other stuff later, and it will downregulate inflammation. And it's actually been studied pretty well. And the same thing goes and that's where the Wim Hof method, especially the breathing, comes in, where it's been shown in a academic setting, in a study that was very well done, that even a violent version of that second line of defense can be completely downregulated through breath work. So, like I said before, the vagus nerve, for example, let's just zoom in on that one. The vagus nerve is the one that kind of takes the organs and the system out of this inflammatory response. So if you can stimulate that vagus nerve and calm it down, you can downregulate inflammation. And that's exactly, like I said, what we're doing with breathing.
Got it. Wow.
Well, you really got me going into science class mode, man. I love it.
I would imagine that initially when someone goes in and they haven't trained much cold, that they're going to have a pretty massive sympathetic response. And
Yep.
that when they then exit and their body is actually warming, they probably have a pretty massive parasympathetic response. Is that true?
Not so much. There's not too much of a drop. A few hours later, they definitely, and a lot of people, if you go to massage or to chiropractic or whatever, something like that, a lot of times, or even to a workout, you can have a parasympathetic response. So just for reference, that's like when you're suddenly feeling totally tired or completely relaxed, more relaxed than ever. A lot of times if you go away from a massage, they say, drink enough water and make sure if you can, take a nap, because you're going to have that parasympathetic drop. That can happen 2 or 3 hours later. I have a lot of people who come to an ice bath workshop or a session, and then they say, that night afterwards I slept better than I've ever slept. And I also think that has to do with, if you face the body with a stressor that, it's not, of course, it's not a survival situation. You're not going to die from doing a 2-minute ice bath, but your body is going to think it's a life threat, so it's going to go full sympathetic. And then you realize that you're extremely capable of doing that. So just feeling that, facing something really difficult and then overcoming it with grace and with joy and, with love, it just takes the load off your shoulders. You go, hold on, actually, I was much stronger than I thought all this time. So that's also what gets people to sleep. It helps them downregulate stress.
It's such a big psychophysiological hack. Because it really does force one into what is taking control of their own consciousness.
Yes. So, and consciousness is an important word, and a lot of times it's being described kind of vaguely, but consciousness is the things with which you are conscious, the things you can see happen. So now, like I said, go back to the beginning in the meditative state, I said, step back and observe yourself as you are in the moment. Now, you do that in an ice bath, you get to step back and observe yourself as you are responding to an intense stressor. So you're doing weight training for your ability to mentally and psychologically and even physiologically deal with that stressor. Because this is one of my favorite quotes in the world: how you are anywhere is how you are everywhere. So how you do anything is how you do anything. The way you respond to stress and discomfort in one place is how you're going to respond to it in another place. So some people, they step into the ice bath and they get pissed off. They just get angry at the cold, which is completely useless. Doesn't make any sense. But then they get to observe themselves. I coach them through it. I show them how to breathe, and I get them. And after a minute and a half, they've completely downregulated from that response. And then, I can feed that back to them and go, where else do you do this? And a lot of times they go, oh, snap, actually, if I'm uncomfortable with this, or I feel that very strong emotion, I get pissed and I snap at my kids, and it gives them this deep insight into the way they deal with life, and a way to train how they deal with life, and to change that response into something, consciously change that response into something they actually want and is helpful to their life.
In terms of sort of progressing into the cold a little bit more, I know there's this start with a 1-minute cold shower at the end, work yourself up to the cold shower, then begin immersing. And the question really is about where are we going here? How cold, how long, right? Because there are some camps outside of Wim Hof. It's basically say, you don't need to go beyond 50 to 55 degrees if you're purely looking at, the physiological benefits of doing the cold.
Yeah, Wim Hof camp is on board with that one.
So the question then is, does one then, like, what if you keep going into 50 and you don't feel cold anymore? You just increase the time, or would you then want to
go? No. So here's the thing. The one thing that adds danger to cold is time. So think about it. Even in survival situations, people die of hypothermia before anything else, before they can even get hungry. Why? Because of the time and the intensity of the cold. There's people who go shipwreck in tropic waters, and they land in the water, and you feel it's like 25 degrees Celsius. Sorry, I'm way completely metric. And it's warm water. Like you're at the Bahamas and you jump in the water and
Right.
go, oh, this ocean is so warm. Well, guess what? If you stay in there for 6 hours or 8 hours, that's still enough difference from your body temperature to die of hypothermia. And it happens a lot in tropic waters. If you stay out there long enough, you just get cold. So time is the main factor. So if you feel, and it's not a performance thing. I have to tell people that so many times. It takes an equal amount of time to convince people that the cold is good as it takes me to convince them that more is not better. As soon as they get it's good, I have to go like, okay, now please understand, more is not better. Better is better, and better could lead to more, but it's not a goal. So I have to take people out of that performance mindset. The reason the course builds up to a 10-minute cold shower is because a shower is safe. You can turn it to warm again and be fine. And also, showers don't get that cold most of the time. I teach in California a lot, around Los Angeles, San Diego, and they go, well, I've been taking cold showers for 3 months. I go, well, you've taken California cold showers.
Right. 70-degree water.
Yeah, but still, it's colder than your surroundings, so you have contrast. And the contrast is what trains most of these systems. Now, if you want to improve or increase or whatever you want to do, like advance in your cold training, I would say, keep the time short and go for a lower temperature. Then there's a point where the temperature can't go any lower anymore. So you're basically in freezing water. Like, okay, let's do Fahrenheit 34, 35 degrees, something like that. That's where you can get an ice bath about that cold. And then you get to a point where 2 minutes of that starts to feel relatively easy and doable. Now, it's very easy to trick yourself into thinking you're being a badass iceman while you're actually just getting hypothermia. Because, you can feel great in the ice, but 10 or 15 minutes later, that cold blood that is in your extremities is going to mix with your core, and you get something we call an afterdrop, which means after sometimes like 20 minutes after you get out of the cold, you get this drop in core body temperature. You start shivering. Your heart has to pump this cold blood. It's very uncomfortable, and it's not safe. And it's because people push themselves and think, like, oh, I'm the Iceman, I can do this. And there's no therapeutic benefit to doing that. It's not a performance tool, and the cold will smack you around the face and humble you before you know it. So keep the time in the cold short, and why not go back and forth? Like if you can do 2 minutes and get out and you feel fine 10, 20 minutes later, and you want to do more, go back in again for another 2 minutes. And then at least you have like a reset moment where you go, am I really okay? How am I feeling? Is it sensible to go back in? Yes, okay, and then I'm going back in. So, and another thing that I like to tell people is shorten your prep time and shorten your recovery time. So instead of lengthening the time in the ice, let's say you do 2 minutes in the ice and you feel great, but it takes you 2 hours to warm up. How about you practice shortening that time where you can do 2 minutes in the ice and 10 minutes to warm up, or 2 minutes in the ice and step out warm and not having to warm up, right? That's true skill. Just bluntly ignoring what you feel and pushing yourself through a 10-minute ice bath and afterwards having to recover for 4 hours, there's no skill involved. You don't learn anything, because pushing yourself across your boundaries, nobody has to learn that. Like all the big problems in the modern world, anxiety, obesity, depression, addiction, if you look at it, those come with and are formed by chronically, constantly ignoring everything you feel and substituting your feelings for other things. And that's a pretty big statement. There might be other reasons, but there's definitely like such a large portion of the suffering we have as humans is ignoring how we feel and doing things that are bad for us anyway. Everybody can do that, and if you do that in an ice bath, you're going to get hurt. That's the point. Use the ice bath as the meditative moment. Be kind to yourself. Find love and joy in the intensity of the cold. Find that primal warrior inside of you that can actually deal with the cold and be with it. Feel it. Feel the fear. Feel the pain. Feel the tingles and pricks in your fingers, and then realize that you can actually deal with it as long as you don't push yourself into doing anything crazy. How's your handstand going? It's pretty solid.
Awesome.
It's been great. Yeah, I've been working on it for about 2 years now. And, to put it in perspective, 5 years ago, I couldn't lift my elbow higher than my shoulder because of injury. And I couldn't do that. I got the injury sleeping. So I was so out of shape that I was so bad at sleeping that I slept on my arm. I completely destroyed my deltoid. Couldn't lift my arm. So the handstand for me is like, just to be able to do an overhead hold is great. And I'm enjoying it. I've gotten up to like a 30-second decently aligned hold, which is something I'm very proud of.
That's a big step. Yeah.
How's your handstand doing?
Really fun. Like once you get the 30-second handstand, now really all the fun stuff starts, because it's like,
what's one thing that I love about the handstand is that it's so humbling to have a learning curve that is so slow, but it's slow enough to keep you humble, but incrementally improving enough to constantly have that little dopamine that goes like, good job, you have like a little miniature next step to go on. And then there's always somebody out there who has just such a masterful thing that you can learn from. And that's the kind of skills I love to pick out to devote my time to, because there's just a lifetime of learning on something like that.
Yeah, there really is. Well, good. So tell everybody how they can learn about your retreats, your book, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so mindlift.com is the place to be with all the info. This depending on when this time goes out, well, actually in the next January I have a beautiful retreat coming up in Poland with all the good stuff we talked about. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm most accessible on Instagram. That's my favorite place to hang out. So at Kasper's Focus, KasperSFocus. And if anybody has questions or want to get in touch with me after this podcast, feel free to. I love to build some interactivity into this. You can find me on Instagram and send me questions or remarks. It's always fun to have. Follow me on Instagram. Do it.
Thank you, Kasper.
Thank you. It was a blast.